arrangement both sides later disputed in court. South Yorkshire police tipped off the BBC about the timing of the raid in exchange for the broadcaster holding the story briefly. The result was that a helicopter was already circling above Richard's home when officers arrived, and the search played out on live television. Footage the BBC later submitted for a broadcasting award, a nomination it did not win, though it would matter greatly in the legal proceedings that followed. Richard denied the allegation from the outset and never wavered. For nearly 2 years, he lived under the shadow of the investigation without being arrested or charged. In June 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service concluded there was insufficient evidence to bring any case against him, but the damage to his reputation, built over more than 5 decades, had already been done on a global scale. In 2016, Richard sued both South Yorkshire Police and the BBC. The case reached the High Court in 2018, and in July of that year, Justice Anthony Mann ruled decisively in Richard's favor, finding that the BBC had breached his privacy rights in a manner that was both unjustified and sensationalist. The BBC was ordered to pay £190,000 in general damages plus £20,000 in aggravated damages, the latter specifically tied to the award submission, and was held responsible for 65% of the total judgment, with the police covering the rest. Additional settlements brought his legal fees and related costs into the millions. Richard testified that the ordeal had cost him an estimated £3.4 million in total once lost business was factored in. The financial reckoning, though significant, was almost beside the point. Richard later described the 2 years of the investigation in painful detail. He lost weight without trying, developed shingles from the stress, and told the court he had feared he might suffer a heart attack or stroke. He described looking in the mirror and feeling as though a much older stranger was staring back. He never returned to live in the Sunningdale apartment that had been searched, saying it felt permanently contaminated. An experience he said was worse than being burgled, because a burglary doesn't unfold live on national television. The public exoneration in 2016 didn't undo what millions had already seen and concluded. Richard has said that the sense of being unfairly judged followed him to nearly every place he traveled afterward. In the years since, he has largely retreated from the intense press visibility that once defined his career, a withdrawal driven not by strategy, but by the simple fact that the spotlight had become unbearable. One lasting effect of the case has been Richard's advocacy for changing UK law, so that people are not publicly named in connection with allegations unless and until they are formally charged. Alongside the professional highs and the very public low of the BBC case runs a quieter, more personal thread. Cliff Richard has never married and has no children, a fact that has fueled decades of public curiosity. He has said repeatedly that this was a deliberate choice rather than a lack of romantic opportunity. Several reasons recur in his own explanations over the years. His Christian faith, which deepened after a conversion in 1965, led him believe that marriage demands a level of commitment he didn't feel he could offer alongside a touring career that kept him away from home for months at a time. He has also pointed to his reluctance to draw a partner into that itinerant lifestyle, his enjoyment of living independently, and, perhaps most pragmatically, his unwillingness to risk marrying and later divorcing, which would have conflicted with his religious convictions. That bachelorhood fueled decades of speculation about his sexuality, a subject Richard has consistently said he considers irrelevant to his public life. He has, however, spoken candidly about the women he did love. In the 1970s, he admitted he had feelings for Olivia Newton-John, though she was already engaged to someone else at the time. The two remained close friends for the rest of her life, and he was reportedly by her side when she died. He also had relationships with the Australian dancer Delia Wicks, and was linked romantically to actress Una Stubbs. His longest-running connection was with tennis champion-turned-broadcaster Sue Barker, a relationship that began in the 1970s and evolved into a lasting friendship after she married someone else. In more recent years, Richard has spoken with unusual candor about the cost of those choices, admitting he sometimes wondered whether he had missed something important by prioritizing his career over family life. Not romantic love, which he says he did experience, but the daily presence of a shared domestic life. At 85, Richard's body is showing the wear of 6 decades. For more than 6 decades, Cliff Richard has been one of the most recognizable names in British music. Often described as Britain's answer to Elvis Presley, He has sold upwards of 250 million records worldwide, placed 68 singles in the UK top 10, and became the only artist besides Elvis to chart in every decade from the 1950s to the 2010s. He was knighted for his contribution to music and charity. Yet behind the clean-cut image and the string of chart hits sits a far more complicated story, one that includes a childhood shaped by displacement and poverty, a public scandal that nearly destroyed him, a lifetime spent without marriage or children, and in his mid-80s, a serious brush with cancer. Cliff Richard was born Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940, in Lucknow, in what was then British India. His father worked as a manager for a catering contractor that served the Indian railway system, and the family, Harry, his parents, and his 3 sisters, lived a relatively comfortable life by the standards of the era. That stability didn't last. When India gained independence in 1947, British families who had built their lives around colonial administration faced a stark decision: stay in a country that no longer wanted or needed them, or return to a homeland many of them barely knew. The Webbs chose to leave, selling most of what they owned and sailing for 3 weeks to Tilbury, England. The England that greeted them bore little resemblance to what they had imagined. There was no welcome waiting at the docks. Only a temporary stay with Cliff's maternal grandmother in a semi-detached house in Carshalton, Surrey. The family had gone from relative comfort in India to something close to financial survival in post-war Britain. They eventually settled into a 3-bedroom council house in Chesham, Hertfordshire, where young Harry shared a bedroom with his sisters, and the family regularly stretched their food budget by serving nothing more than tea and sugared toast for dinner. Not as a treat, but because it was what they could afford. Despite the hardship, Harry did well at Chesham Secondary Modern School, staying on past the minimum leaving age to sit his English literature O-level and excelling at athletics, including football at the county level. But it was American rock and roll, blaring from records his parents found bewildering, that captured his imagination. At 16, his father reluctantly bought him a guitar. Not long after finishing school, Harry took a clerical job at the same electrical factory where his father worked, treating it as little more than a placeholder until music could take over. In 1957, Harry formed a school vocal group and briefly sang with a skiffle outfit before starting his own rock band, which he named the Drifters. Around the same time, at his manager's urging, he adopted the stage name Cliff Richards, later shortened to Cliff Richard, to better suit the music business. His breakthrough came in 1958. After an early gig at a ballroom in Derbyshire, producer Nori Permer of EMI's Columbia label invited him to audition at Abbey Road Studios. The plan was to record an American cover, Schoolboy Crush, as the A-side, with a quickly recorded original called Move It relegated to the B-side. It was Move It that caught fire, reaching number 2 on the UK singles chart that autumn and effectively launching British rock and roll as a homegrown genre. From there, Cliff's career accelerated at a pace few artists have matched before or since. He racked up 68 top 10 singles and 14 number ones, including 4 Christmas chart toppers, more than any other artist in UK history. He would go on to chart in every one of the 6 decades that followed his debut. On the surface, it was an almost unbroken run of success. Underneath, his personal life told a very different story. In August 2014, Cliff Richard was on holiday in Portugal when he turned on the television and watched live as police searched his home in Sunningdale, Berkshire. He had received no warning. He learned what was happening the same way millions of viewers did, through helicopter footage broadcast by the BBC. The allegation behind the raid dated back to 1985, tied to an event at Sheffield Football Stadium featuring the American evangelist Billy Graham. Decades later, a man who had attended as a teenager came forward with a claim against Richard. The accusation reached the Metropolitan Police at a moment when British law enforcement was intensely focused on historical abuse cases in the wake of the Jimmy Savile scandal, and it was passed to South Yorkshire Police for investigation. What followed became almost as controversial as the allegation itself. A BBC journalist learned of the planned search in advance, and in an